Okay, good evening and welcome everybody to Prairie Lights and to this wonderful reading we're about to have by two prominent Irish poets. The first to read will be Joan McBreen, and she is a linchpin of Irish literature. She is a fixture at all the major festivals in Ireland, the Sligo Yeats Festival, the Listowel Festival, the Irish Writers' Centre in Dublin. You will see her there and participating. She's published many collections of poetry. The most prominent is Heather Island, that she has here tonight, and she's also, her last book was Winter in the Eye, new and selected poems. Joan also has, she's very unique in that she does a great combination of poetry and music. And she has one of her CDs, this is just hot off the press here, The Mountain Ash in Connemara, just a beautiful, beautiful compilation of her poetry and string quartet music. Joan has been and Noel have been on a reading tour throughout the states of Minnesota and Iowa, and this is the second to the last stop on their tour. Tomorrow is Davenport at the strange time of 1:45. So if you want to see them yet again, some people that were here saw them on Sunday night have come back tonight, so you can drive then. But otherwise, let's enjoy these great poets. Really, Joan was the person that was instrumental in introducing me and to all the wonderful Irish poets, contemporary poets, and she's just a warm and generous person, fine poet that is well read and meaningful to all of us who love Irish literature. So, Joan McBreen.
Thanks very much indeed, Mary, for that warm introduction, and I'm delighted to be back here in Prairie Lights. I read here with another fellow Irish poet, Seamus Cashman, 3.5 years ago, so it's a real pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank you all for coming out to hear my reading this evening with my friend and fellow poet Noel Monahan. And we are coming towards the end, as Mary said, of our tour of the Midwest, and we have had a wonderful time. I'd like to thank Jan and the staff here at the Prairie Lights bookshop, and I'd also, of course, like to thank Mary for so kindly going to so much trouble to arrange this event. And what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to read some poems from Winter in the Eye, selected poems, and from my most recent collection, Heather Island. And hopefully, if I don't run out of time, one or two poems that have not yet been published in book form. It's just wonderful to have Keith and Tara from the Beggarman here to charm us with their music. So I'm going to bring you to Sligo first, where I come from, where I was born and grew up. Classybone was when I was growing up and well into my adult life, owned by Lord Louis Mountbatten, and he and his family, members of the royal family in Britain, came to Classybone in Mullaghmore in County Sligo every year, and tragically, when Ireland was at the height of the Troubles, Lord Louis Mountbatten and some of the members of his family were out in the bay in Mullaghmore on a beautiful, beautiful July day, and he was in the boat Shadow 5, and the boat was blown up by the IRA, and many of the family members, including Lord Louis Mountbatten, were killed. Classybone. We tied ropes to poles on the street, and the length of the swing was the length of the rope. We drew hopscotch squares there too, and swore at the meat factory girls who let water drip from tin buckets, spoiling the chalky game. We were sent on walks to the Holy Well because it used to take us ages, and my mother thought the air and the prayers good for us. Then one summer, My father hired a Ford car and drove us to Mullaghmore, where I saw Classy-Bawn for the first time. After that, nothing was the same. And then to the home of a friend of mine in Tuam and her broken swing. I don't do long introductions to the poems because I hope that the text of the poems speaks for itself. The broken swing. Come with me through the rusting gates from the streets of the town into this high-walled garden and move ankle-deep in bluebells under the beech trees where the bickering crows nest high. Come through the storm door to the shadows of the house, and when your eyes grow used to the dim light, step over the old papers, the clothes piled up on chairs, and draw close to the black and white photograph of your mother. Be quiet, and you might even hear the piano played. Show me the bedroom where you slept, your toys still on the floor. Shake the dust from the books you had forgotten about, and I will follow you then to the garden with the broken swing. Mend it quickly and bring your children here. Take them in from the town to pick bluebells in the garden. Stay near the house with the shuttered windows from where you first saw the stars. And I'm now going to bring you back to Sligo again, and I'm going to read the title poem from my first book, The Wind Beyond the Wall. My father was a merchant seaman, so my mother was raising the 4 children by and large by herself in Sligo, and we saw my father usually no more than twice for a couple of weeks every year. The wind beyond the wall. The wind beyond the high wall at the back of our house contained itself there, when barefoot on the cold bedroom floor I pressed my face against the glass. Curtains billowed back, created swaying shadows in the small room. The night was another world, and I was safe, apart from the wind beyond the wall. The lamp before the Sacred Heart glowed. Coals hissed in the grate, and on days missed from school, the hands of the clock on the mantelpiece seemed scarcely to move at all. On the small round table, she set cups, plates, new bread. Mice scuttled in the skirting when she softly dusted the photograph of the man in uniform. In dreams I see his face, recognize his penetrating gaze, and she and I are back in that house, wanting something beyond my touch, beyond hers. On the 1st of February every year we celebrate the feast day of St. Bridget, and many of the friends I have here in the United States will traditionally receive a St. Bridget's cross woven from rushes from me. Poem for St. Bridget's Day. Children gather rushes, wind whistles through their fingers, rain blurs their vision. All evening they will weave and interweave crosses, the history of Bridget's love. It is early morning. A chieftain slowly lifts his head, sees a woman enter, bearing armfuls of green spokes. Her face floats all day about him, her body's outline vague. He woke twice that night, wandered to the window, tired with darkness, unaware what had bound them together. Spring, perhaps, the green stems, her breath warm on his face. Are there 2 shadows caught in branches outside, like fish in a net? The phenomenon of the mother-daughter relationship is universal and can, in many instances, be difficult. So, at one point, I wrote a book called Someone Should Tell My Mother. Someone should tell my mother. Tonight my mother is walking in a bare room over my head. Someone should tell her to sleep now. Tonight my mother is holding a skirtful of apples warm against her breast. Someone should tell her to eat now. Tonight my mother is sewing a dress for me. She cries out when the needle pierces her hand. Someone should tell her how helpless I am. Tonight I will tell my mother she must leave me alone. But wait, I cannot. I hear a rustling sound coming from the room, like someone shifting through hundreds of pages, seeking a happy ending, and the sound is like the sea, which is very far away. I'm a deeply superstitious person, and when my children were small, I was forever telling them what to do and what not to do. Not to bring hawthorn into the house, not to put the shoes on the table, not to open the umbrellas, and on and on and on. The list is endless. In the brief time given, and this, I suppose I should also say that this is a poem about just how brief the time is we have with our children when they're little. All of a sudden, they're grown up, and sometimes they're gone, and we've given them wings to fly. In the brief time given, I stand by the table, making rules for my child, his hand on the fruit, his eyes looking beyond me through the window at the trees and the bird tuning up. I tell him not to put shoes on the table, bring hawthorn indoors, break mirrors or open umbrellas in the house. Rain pours on lilacs in the yard, and I shelter him with myself. Then I get on with the morning wash, the child leaving me to it, taking with him into the distance images of secret and threat, alive to what my words said and did not say in the brief time given. In my poem, The Photograph of My Aunts, this was an actual photograph that hung in our house in Sligo over the piano. The photograph I found beneath the purple box must have been lost and left behind. It shows two sisters wearing white lace in late summertime. Goats graze under lilac trees. Two older women wearing straw hats, stitched in pink and blue, tiny knitted garments. Their dresses blow in a breeze that lifts the edges, revealing black button boots. The sisters near the window frame have hair blown in a hazy lane. This portrait stares from my wall. The faces haunt me with other likenesses. It hangs over the piano near the painting of an apple orchard. The sisters are dead. In the photograph, they wear white shoes. They lean against the warm wall of the house. And I'll finish this section of the reading with a very short poem called One for Sorrow. And I don't believe there's a single Irish poem, Irish poet, I should say, that hasn't attempted to write a poem about a blackbird. One magpie rests on a winter bush. Crows scavenge a stubble field. From where I am, I cannot see or hear you. The train moves west. You disappear. Yet the wool I feel beneath my fingers is the wool of your coat. You stood outside the door, shaded your eyes and said, "The blackbird. It's the blackbird I hear." And now I'm going to read just a couple of poems from my most recent collection, Heather Island. And I'm going to start with a poem called Red Cloud, Nebraska. I have been a Willa Cather fan for as long as I can remember, and I have been reading her novels, and at one point a few years ago I went on what my husband and I called our Willa Cather pilgrimage to Red Cloud. I might add that on that same particular day, he did a U-turn in the middle of the street, trying to catch up with the Willa Cather tour of people who he had seen in the distance. And suddenly we were surrounded by 2 American police cars. And his excuse out the window of the car, the policeman said, you know, you can't do this here. You can't just turn your car around in the middle of the street. And my husband's first response was, well, the street's wide enough, and in any event, I'm from Ireland. So that's been his kind of stock excuse to get out of trouble when he's over here. The stories are endless. Red Cloud, Nebraska. The history of every country begins in the heart of a man or a woman, and that's from Willa Cather's wonderful novel, O Pioneers. That you had brought me this far from my country of rain to prairies and desolation was in itself enough. I walked the wide street of Red Cloud. She walked there too, leaned against her beloved trees, oak and silver-breasted birches, and saw in the hearts of men and women everything make-believe and real. And I'd like to read a poem now called Some Deer. And at Mary Swander's wonderful home earlier today, we had a very interesting conversation that ranged over how poems are written nowadays in America and how poems are written in Ireland. And this particular poem had been produced at a workshop given by an American poet whom I shall not name. And I have to say that she did actually give me quite a bit of good advice. And also Noel and I and Joe, as we've travelled around the Midwest, have been looking at your wild deer in the fields, and it has just been so beautiful to see them in their natural habitat. Some deer. Movement in the trees. I see standing and watchful a herd of deer. Lime twigs crack underfoot. The deer take fright, spring one after another deep into the woods. Next day 4 appear, and I meet their gaze. They stand still, a grey rain on their pelts. Their oval eyes look on pines and oaks, on the earth, on the chasm of starry night. In a dream that night, they are mirrored in a window pane as an army goes by. Reflected in the knife I use to cut bread are the deer who quiet the heart. And back to Sligo and Ben Bulben and the Garavogue and Knocknarea and my parents. Swan. My mother hated swans. She liked looking at them on the Garavogue, which is the river that runs through Sligo, when they were on the river. But sometimes in wintertime, when the river would be quite low, they would leave the Garavogue and they'd come up on the slipway, which was down facing out from the front of our house. And we would see their long, slimy, black legs and those awful claws that they had for feet. The webbed feet, actually, would be more accurate. And my mother, who was also deeply superstitious, would immediately say, "Oh my God, something terrible is going to happen." In those days in Ireland, there was no such thing as children and psychoanalysts and what the nuns and the mothers of Ireland were doing to their little tender minds, you know. Another thing she used to do was when she might not have heard from my father for some time, he would be sailing around the world in places like Murmansk and Russia and the China Sea, and she'd say, "Oh, God knows where he is now, God knows when we're going to get any money. I'll just have to put the 4 of you into the orphanage." And of course, there was just no consideration that, these little tender minds actually thought she was serious, Swan. This poem is titled Swan. Better I had not seen you with your webbed feet on the street where I grew up. On a clear January day, you left the Garavogue. What did you seek? Better to swim on the still water, hold your own counsel, or make love to your mate. Ben Bulben's shadow moves closer to town. You have no song. What use your inarticulate wishes? Mine are old, and it is of death you remind me. I bring spring flowers to my parents' grave in the old cemetery, Sligo. The light fades fast, and someone plays a tin whistle in the street. I sing my own song. And the last two poems, one I'm going to bring you to Connemara, to Omey Island, which famously, page 26, which famously was the childhood home of the grandfather of the Irish poet Louis MacNeice. The Trinity College historian David Fitzpatrick has written a wonderful life of the grandfather, John Frederick MacNeice, called Solitary and Wild. And the first couple of chapters in that book deal with the whole business of Louis MacNeice and his grandfather and indeed his grandmother and their life on Omey Island. He was the Church of Ireland the Protestant rector, and then there was a row between the Catholic clergy and the Protestants, and the MacNeices were what they could say in Ireland. They were ran off the island. Louis MacNeice, as a poet, always carried Connemara and the west of Ireland in his heart, right through the rest of his life. And if you ever do come to that particular part of Connemara, do go to visit Omey Island. It's tidal. You can actually walk or drive out there when the tide is out. But please do not ignore the incoming tide. Or you'll find yourself stranded out there without food or drink for the entire night, and it has happened, people. The poem deals with the fact that Louis MacNeice's mother became an invalid in Carrickfergus in Belfast, where his father had been posted as the clergyman. And when MacNeice was 5, she was institutionalised, and he never saw his mother again. So also this was a great haunting scar that he carried. In memory of Louis MacNeice, there, hidden by pale shrubbery, he watched his mother walk the garden path in tears. Between the poems and the life, this haunted him, his childhood road closed. Always he heard her voice from night shadows, a scent of jasmine at the gate she opened and walked through. And I'll finish my reading with the title poem of this volume, Heather Island, and it is dedicated to my friend and neighbour and fellow poet, Eamon Grennan. Heather Island. November sunlight shines on Tully Lake, on the slate roof of your house. When the high road was tarred and new water pipes laid along the field between us, sallies and fuchsias were dragged up by the roots. The lake endured when dusk fell. The songbirds left for Heather Island. Mourning their loss, I pulled my scarf tighter around my throat. The sky will argue with the wind, with the whole of bird-lore, and scattered whin, sally and fuchsia, their sheltering branches. Thank you very much. So, I call on Noel now to give you his reading.
No, it's music.
We have a little, another tune here, a little musical interlude. You want to
Come all you fair and tender maids who flourish in your prime. Beware, beware, keep your garden fair. Let no man steal your time. Let no man steal your time. For when your time is past and gone, he'll care no more for you, and every place that your time was waste will all spread over through, will all spread over through. For woman is a branchy tree, and man's a clinging vine, and from a branch's careless teen, he'll take what he can find, he'll take what he can find. Gardener's son was standing there. 3 flowers he gave to me, the pink, the blue, and the violet too. The red, red rosy tree, the red, red rosy tree. Well, I forsook the red rose bush and gained the willow tree, that all the world might plainly see how my love slighted me, how my love slighted me. The woman is a branchy tree, and man's a clinging vine, from a branch's carelessly. He'll take what he can find, he'll take what he can find. All you fair and tender maids who flourish in your prime, beware, beware, keep your garden fair. Let no man steal your time, let no man steal your time. Let no man steal your time, let no man steal your time.
All right. Thank you so much for the Biggerman. How lucky we are to have them here tonight. And before I introduce Noel, we're lucky to have yet a third guest from Ireland that I brought here tonight. And he's just going to make a little cameo appearance to give us his blessing. Come on out. There he is. It's St. Patrick himself.
May the blessings of God the Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost descend upon you all and remain with you forever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. All right. Now, Noel Monahan has 5 collections of poetry, and actually his most recent, six. You gave me you gotta update your bio there now. The most recent is a wonderful book, Where the Wind Sleeps. It's a new and selected poems. It's a beautiful collection of wit and wisdom. And Noel has won literary awards, including the Seacat National Award organized by Poetry Ireland, and then a whole list of others. I mean, he has a big trophy case at home, I'm sure, to hold all of his awards. It's quite an astounding list. He's also written plays in he's a translator and been translated into Italian, French, Romanian, and Russian. He's directed musicals. He's really a man of letters, and he also has become a bestseller in America. On this book tour, he has sold 70 volumes of his own poetry, which is really, if you're a poet, you know that's like what you might sell in a year, right? So he's sold those in the last couple weeks. And if he runs out of books, you can have Prairie Lights order them for you. And so don't give up hope. You can get Noel Monahan, and he is here tonight to enlighten and entertain us. Noel?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mary, for that lovely introduction. Delighted to be here in this beautiful bookshop. It's amazing, and thanks, Lindsay, for all the very warm welcome. Delighted to have the musicians along here, and I believe with a Cavan connection, so that makes it even all the more exciting. I'd like to open up the reading with a poem that refers to the Cavan landscape where I've been living for up in 40 years, but I think by now I could be claimed to be a Cavan person, but it's a very, very subtle and difficult task. As you know, if you ever visit Cavan, Monahan is famous for its drumlins. And drumlins is the Irish word for the little ridges, and they were left there when the last ice age moved on. So, and it's extraordinary how the different townlands of Cavan are referred to the domestic animals that you'll find in the farming area. Drumlins. When ice moved on at the end of an age, piles of stones stood naked, longing for grass. The hills hand down root words, the people say, song of utterance, underworld of names. Drumalee, Drumkerry, Drumnamuck, Drumbow, ghostly ridges of calves, sheep, pigs and cows. Storybook of hills, fields of fairy tales, cling like a last goodbye. I watch them sleep below woolen clouds. Rivers flow, lakes rest, a beauty all to themselves, no fine curves, no straight lines, oblique packages of earth, dropped, abandoned to an outspoken wind, hills too old for our clocks. They stand like unsent parcels, waiting for the ice to return. Now, anyone going back to Ireland, and if you have been over here for a while, will find that there's a lot of social and cultural change happening over there. And once when I was teaching for 36 years or thereabouts, and when I was leaving school in the morning, I passed the crossroads. But on the way home, I found they had taken the crossroads away. It had been moved. Now, I think that's fairly intensive change. And I wrote this poem entitled The New Bypass. We're talking about the new bypass. The Cavan people will probably know all about it. And I like to use in poetry the incantatory devices. Sometimes you hear in conversations, other times you hear really in prayer. And that's the way I work with poetry. Oftentimes, it's a very simple explanation of my poetry is I like to think that I think in images and try and get the right type of music in the line. And it's lovely to hear the musicians here beside me because that's what it's all about. The new bypass. There went out a decree from the county manager. All crossroads come to roundabouts. now and in the last years of the millennium. And behold, the bypass came to pass. I am the way, the blood, and the tar. I will open millions of cat's eyes in the dark. And there were roadworks everywhere, a flotilla of red and white buntings across barrels, manholes popping up, country streams forced underground. The yellow Ackerman scooped the crossroads in his pincher jaws and laid it on a trailer. I am the way, the blood, and the tar. I will open millions of cat's eyes in the dark. Komatsu, Kobelco, Hitachi, caterpillar drumlins to clay and water. An amber procession of clay moved past Pentecostal stones, shouting in red lorries. Navel stones, altar stones, cursing stones, stones of destiny, stones upon stones, systoling and diastoling away from the heart of the provincial town. I am the way, the blood and the tar. I will open millions of cat's eyes in the dark. The lamb is a lost cause by the roadside. The shepherd was killed at a black spot. Umpteen advertisements in huge letters, Esso, Texaco, Coca-Cola, line the highway. Speed limits flash across radio chat shows. CD music whizzes past the whispers of lost fields, forgotten towns, dancing at the crossroads. Oh Christ, turn up the volume, keep the rhythm coming on the goddamn road. I am the way, the blood, and the tar. I will open millions of cat's eyes in the dark. And just a short poem now, entitled Quilca. Of course, refers to the Quilca Mountains, and they're beautiful mountains. I think Quilca is the Irish, possibly referring to the chalk, calc. You probably all remember your Irish from way back in school. But funny enough, I think that a lot of male poets like to project the Mother Earth concept on the hills and on the rivers. So if you'll all excuse me with this little psychoanalytical movement over to a projection of the female and seeing the female in the mountains. Quilca. This woman is strange. Perfume of moss and wild asphodel, squatting here in the wilderness, a blanket of bog about her shoulders, her fierce breasts held in place by winds and heather. Sheep graze in her, birds wing across her limbs. The wind gives her words, the sun lights up her chalky face. Farmers drive stakes through her peaty flesh. Black streams are veins winding slowly round her hips. Bog water trickles down her legs. And again, I seem to be playing a lot of the Cavan poems this evening. I talked about social and cultural change, and some of you may know of the old Prairie. The nuns lived on Main Street, the Poor Clare nuns. There was a very unfortunate fire there in 1943, but the poem today, at the moment, I'm dealing with the concept of how convents are closing all over Ireland, and they're sold for different purposes. And in this case, it's a restaurant, and you know, it's such a big change to go to a restaurant in a convent. The old Priory. Remember the convent? It's a restaurant now. The few remaining nuns renamed themselves and left for a bungalow on the hill. The imprint of time lingers in the small windows, the stone walls that restrain talk to whispers. The new faithful congregate around the cloister tables, avoiding thoughts of heaven for fear of altitude sickness that might reduce their gastronomic pleasures. They hunger and thirst. The chef is guru, the coy angels waitresses. I sat opposite Anne, a candlelight between us, was bemused by the menu, wondering how a monkfish entered a nun's priory, and felt good when I ate him, knowing he was an intruder in a place of holies, where nuns bent over pews, fasting, abstaining, meditating on the Passion for a smidgen of peace. The old priory is comfortable with time. It fed the soul. It feeds the body. As you leave, the door latch click clanks. Old time, new time. So now I might move over and maybe read from Curve of the Moon. And this is a long poem, but I'm just reading an extract. Curve of the Moon really was inspired, and it took me about 15 years to write it. I just making little notes and recalling images and especially sounds and of voices of the people in Granard in County Longford, because that's where I grew up. And this little extract deals with the people going to bed and their dreams and all the strange little dreams that they might have in Granard, County Longford. Winking stars appear, little windows to our souls in darkness. The town's voice quietens into the night. Inner voices of the people sing to themselves in sleep. Their voices rise above the chorus of the day, above the crowd, mob, and congregation. They sing alone in sleep. Mary Major screams internally. Someone is walking inside her heart, and she feels the thud of his boots in her blood. Mother Angela sprinkles children's tears about the playground. Bugon Kiernan, retired commercial traveller, rides a bicycle through the roads and byways of his dreams. Canon O'Kane, parish priest, carries everyone's cross up Main Street, up the hill, across a desert of ploughed land to a field of stones. Mike the barber looks into a big mirror and shaves the dead face of every person in town. Mary Verdon remembers her childhood and cries all night beside the turnip pulper in the shed. Mrs. Blaney writes messages to herself every day and reads them aloud in her sleep. Dear Mrs. Blaney, remember to leave the key under the mat, just in case Mr. Blaney returns unexpectedly from the grave, and report the scoundrels of children that knock and kick down your door to the master, the nuns, the priest, and the guards. And don't forget to boil the potatoes and pay for the milk and bread, and God willing, leave money for the priest in case you die in your bed. Yours truly, Mary Blaney. Yeah, Granard was an interesting place growing up. It really was, you know. And now I'd like to, I write in the Irish language as well as English, and I like to be proud of the fact that I have Granard Irish. As you all know, Granard is not a Gaeltacht area by any means. But I had the language drummed into me in school, and some of the poets really who have been writing in the Irish language said, you should write in the Irish language because you've got, you have it there, so why not use it? Now, this is an extract from a long poem. It's entitled Mad Sweeney, Bulla Sivna, and it's an old medieval story about a king that lived up there between Antrim and Down, and there are connections with the Dalriad in Scotland. But with the coming of Christianity, the pagan king, was not happy with all this praying and this social and cultural change and all the psalms and all that religion stuff. St. Patrick won't be very happy with what's going to happen here. And he stripped naked and he ran up to St. Ronan, and he grabbed the psalter from him and threw it down the well. And St. Ronan said, we'll have no more of that. And he changed him into a bird, and he had to fly all round Ireland to places like Limerick. He even visited Cavan, met his wife there, and she abandoned him because, again, he was just a bird. And eventually, he met some saint down in Carlow, and he was converted, and he died happily, as all the Irish do. So I'll read the little piece in Irish first, where he is turned into a bird, and I'll read the translation after. Quer Ronan ag fiddle sivna, Bauran gali os a chion, Go bein ag dridum amach on a veil, Cletchi in nonner gruig, Is vi sivna whale bache, dubber na focal, in amcher cugga myra, shakehead trega shocked. Ard sivna, Idar ga chid talav, Idar ga cheer, Idar ga agna, Ruach locha, Ruach awan, ag bratno féin san scahan ishka, agus evenas leis féin. Awar lénwar, gunta godonna, Biolar brega in a gob, Los gan ahar, gan wahar, more himpele, Los na man shi awulu in a chligan, Los bui bialtana ag lonru fui ska na deloga, Kigels na grenia inishka, Gach chalcha san asach in Lan Balkan. Ronan put a mask over Sweeney's face. A full moon above him, a bird's beak breaking out of his mouth, feathers instead of hair, and Sweeney was in danger of drowning in a well of words at the time of the Battle of Moira, 637. A great man, that Sweeney, between two places, between two countries, between two minds, looking at himself in a water mirror by the lakeside, on the riverbank, and he all delighted with himself. An educated look, badly bruised, fool's watercress in his gob, duckweed all around him, foxglove ringing in his skull, marsh marigolds yellowing under an umbrella of leaves, play of sunlight on the water, a voice lost in the wilderness in Glen Bulkin. And I'd like now to read the title poem from this collection, Where the Wind Sleeps, and that takes us down the Shannon to the ruins of monasteries there. I'm interested in that particular area because it's part of South Longford, and it's amazing the number of ruins of monasteries you find on the islands throughout Ireland. And oftentimes, I think there's an energy somewhere there that, the old ways don't just disappear in some ways they live on and die rather slowly. Where the wind sleeps, something will come to you in a dream that will help you find your way in abandoned places. Here the wind sleeps with nettles and briars in half-empty walls, and the owl hatches her chicks in the belfry. Here apparitions of monks in off-white habits sleepwalk, holding empty skulls in their hands and listening to the slow noise of old ways dying. Each in his solitude finds dereliction, prayer that does not rest on words but lives in darkness. And out of the depths of night, heaven falls like snow on a linen altar. 2 candles burn, carnations as white as children's teeth are little nails of glory and grief. And before I read the final poem, I'd like to thank Joan McBreen for taking me along on this great tour. It's been a wonderful experience. I want to thank you, the audience, for your attention here tonight. You've been a wonderful audience, and I've enjoyed reading to you all. Again, great to have musicians, I suppose, because poetry and music are one and the same in many ways, so it's lovely. And again, thanks, Mary, for all your help and organising. Mary is this extraordinary person that seems to be able to make all these things happen, so thank you very much. The last poem is a retrieve from childhood. It's entitled, it's a really cheerful title, The Funeral Game. When we were young and back in Granard, we hadn't television at the time, so we had to be inventive and create our own recreation. And, you know, in the winter times, it was very hard to think up ideas of games. So we ended up burying little pets and animals and things like that and ritualizing them. And I think in some strange way, we prepare for something, tragedies later on in life. The poem is entitled The Funeral Game. That winter, we came to terms with death. Every shoebox was a coffin for anything small and dead. And we wrapped them in calicos, velvets. We grabbed hats, coats, umbrellas from the hallway to dress as mourners. Someone struck an iron girder in the hay shed to sound the funeral bell. John Joe beat the dead march on the saucepan. We held wakes, issued death certificates to old crows, kittens, chickens, lined the graves with stones, erected crosses with ash sticks. We pretended to cry, struggled with Latin prayers, filled the wet graves in the clover field, genuflected in the direction of a wind bush. The rain pelting down, we left by a side gap, back to the hay shed for tea, bread, butter, for all who travelled long journeys. Thank you very much.
Our new friend Joan McBreen is from Sligo, and Sligo is a very famous part of Ireland for fiddle playing. And a lot of the Irish, you know, what we associate with the Irish style of fiddle playing came from there. And so we're going to say farewell with a tune called Farewell to Erin, which is one of the most famous and sometimes daunting fiddle tunes. Yeah.
thank you all for coming, and come and buy some books, and you can chat with the poets afterwards, and we'll just continue this party until the wee hours of the morning. Apparently last night in Cedar Falls, they kicked them out of the restaurant. It was so late. So we're hoping we can find a restaurant that'll kick us out tonight. Thank you.